Hello. I was pausing for a minute to let the street cleaning machine go by. How's everybody doing this morning? All right, welcome. It's Resistance Live for the 11th of July, 2024. And we have chaos in the offing, which seems to be exactly the place in which we find ourselves every single day right now for the last 2 weeks. But we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about strategy, and we're going to talk about potential consequences to where we find ourselves and all that good stuff. First things first, I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. I'm ECM, you know that. Today, I am wearing a white shell type t-shirt. My thick gold hoops are in, my hair is down. I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. I'm in front of my plant and my lamp and my chair in my office. And I'm coming to you for a very limited future time from occupied Tongva territory, also known as Southern California. More on scheduling at the end of today's broadcast. All right, so I had a request and I toyed with it on the Patreon feed this morning. Reminder, you can become a subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive to ask me questions before every broadcast. I had a request to not talk about the kind of like anti-Biden stuff. And as much as I would like to do that, I think we have to really kind of come to terms with the total ongoing revolting pile-on by white male and a few white women, pundits, celebrities, and now a few politicians that essentially are like a recipe for the end of democracy. So I spent the last couple of days talking about this in greater detail, but there's a few things that I just want to say today because I think that we really are at a moment where the narrative has to change. All right. So let's just talk about the lack of logistical planning and the worst case scenarios of what is being proposed by this absolute feeding frenzy of burn it all down kind of nonsense that is coming from, and I mean, I have to say it again, largely white male pundits. I have not seen, by the way, a single pundit of color, person of color, far left person of any nature coming forward and asking Biden to step aside. People need to actually kind of look at this and look at it through the lens of like the coalition that is continuing to back Biden, because there is a very noticeable identity issue related to this. The people who are calling for Biden to step aside are like 99% white men. And that is largely because white men are the people who are more likely to be able to survive a second Trump presidency than any of the rest of us. And from the space of where we sit, you know, and I know we were on the air yesterday when the Clooney op-ed broke. I am just really disgusted by this, okay? Because I just have to say that, you know, messing around with our children's future, messing around with the future of democracy because you think that a candidate might not necessarily be up to par because of a conversation that you had with him at a celebrity fundraiser is really amoral and wrong, okay? And there was one person on the Patreon feed this morning who almost got a block for saying that they trusted George Clooney more than they trusted the current administration. And I just have to say something. Unless George Clooney in his spare time has gotten a doctorate in neurology, his opinion is meaningless. Meaningless. Not to mention that he lives in France with his wife and his children. And that like whatever happens in this election is going to have literally no impact on him, okay? It's completely wrong, like completely wrong. Nobody should care what a Hollywood celebrity who doesn't even live in America says about the current presidential race, okay? And I have to say that at this point, we really need to start rejecting all of this nonsense, particularly coming out of the mouths of white rich men. I mean, I'm so over it. Here's what needs to happen instead. We really have to flip the narrative on this, okay? And we've been talking so much about Project 2025 on this broadcast, not just in the last few weeks, but honestly, we've been talking about it here for like the better part of the last 9 months in fits and starts. And at the moment, there are a number of really great resources. If you are not familiar with Project 2025, or you want to figure out how to message it, I'm going to refer you to a couple of links here. There's a website called stopthecoup2025.com that has a bullet point downloadable PDF that will tell you everything you need to know about Project 2025. The Biden campaign has done something very similar. You can go to joebiden.com/project2025 and you can see everything that's on there, okay? And you don't have to read the whole 900-page document, but you need to be familiar with the talking points, okay? You can also go search for the BBC's summary of this, which is an incredibly well-rounded and fact-checked summary of what is contained in Project 2025. So those are some resources that you can use to familiarize yourself with it if you don't know already. But I have to make this really plain because I woke up really angry this morning. Those of you who are on my threads have seen it. We are in a situation here where Joe Biden has had an incredibly successful first term as president, right? I hope nobody can disagree on this. He pulled us out of a once-in-a-century pandemic. He's forgiven billions of dollars in student loans. He returned us to the climate accords. He has rebuilt our respect on the international stage. He got a standing ovation from 30 NATO member leaders just a couple of days ago as a result of a speech that he gave, right? We've seen him do great things with regard to prescription drugs, great things with regard to insulin prices, great things on the front of trying to protect LGBTQ plus Americans. I mean, honestly, the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. You could not ask for a better platform from an incumbent president than what Joe Biden has dished up, okay? Here's the problem right now. If the messaging cycle as it currently sits continues, it's not about whether or not people are suddenly going to magically vote for Trump. It's about whether or not people are going to just decide to sit the election out. That's what I'm worried about at this point, that the messaging is so omnipresent that people are just like, screw it, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to vote. That's what I'm afraid of, okay? Honestly, that's what I'm afraid of in this arena, okay? And so one of the things that we need to do here is really start trying to pivot the narrative. And we've seen this happen more and more in the mainstream media over the last day and a half or so. Joy Reid is doing a segment on Project 2025 at the top of her broadcast every night right now. Strongly encourage you to go find it. Don't complain about Joy on debate night. Just don't, okay? Like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it from anybody. She is doing great work right now, and particularly by platforming, by the way, Black commentators who are out there talking about why Biden should be the nominee. This is at this moment, one of the things that needs to happen sort of like nationwide. People need to start talking about Project 2025. You need to start talking about it through the lens of the people that you are speaking to. And we have great examples of this morning on the Patreon feed, by the way. I'm not going to call somebody out by name, but one of our viewers over on Patreon lives in affordable housing and had a fellow tenant in that affordable housing complex talking vote Republican or bust. And this person, who is admittedly that they are very shy and they don't normally use their voice in this way, screwed up their courage and said to their fellow tenant, do you realize that if Trump wins, we will be homeless, that affordable housing will be eliminated and we will be on the street? And that's written down in Project 2025. This actually got through to someone because it's through the lens of the services that they need and already access that they may not yet realize are in jeopardy. It's that kind of thing that we need to start doing. We need to start having those conversations right now, because I'm just going to tell you something else. There is a lens through which this chaos could continue until the Democratic National Convention. All right. Now, I had a lot of questions about the comment I made yesterday about potential legal challenges to keeping a Democratic candidate on the ballot in the event that like Biden is replaced, which is not going to happen. But I want to talk about it for a minute. And I also want to talk about the convention itself, because what I'm worried about right now is just the absolute minefield that has been created by these white male pundits and, opinion writers and celebrities who really are not educated on the way any of this works. And it's so freaking dangerous. Just so dangerous. And we need to actually really be thinking through this in very clear ways. Okay, so let's talk about the primary process and the convention, okay? A couple people pointed out on the Patreon feed that primaries are, and this is not actually completely true, but there's an argument to be made that primaries are not quote unquote binding until the convention itself. That's actually not true, okay? If you go back and you look at what happened after the 1968 presidential convention for the Democrats, where Hubert Humphrey got enough electoral votes for president despite not winning a single primary, that was a moment that revised the entire primary process in the Democratic Party. And we now have what is described as a binding primary process. Electoral votes are determined on the basis of who voted for what candidate in the primary. Now, does that mean on the floor of the convention there can't be an electoral fight? No. But I'm going to point something out to you that I think is really significant here. It's very clear to me, and there's actually reporting on this morning, that the far right wing, including lawyers for the Heritage Foundation, which is behind Project 2025, are working on lawsuits to keep any potential substitute candidate off the ballot because they did not win the primaries in the states. I warned you all this was going to happen. I talked about this yesterday, and I'm going to say something else. At this point, given where we are in our legal system and our judiciary and with judge shopping for Trump-appointed judges, it almost doesn't matter whether or not they have a real legal basis to file a lawsuit like this. Because the best case scenario, if Biden is replaced as the candidate, again, which is not going to happen, but the best case scenario, if something like that were to happen, is that the Democratic Party would be wrapped up in lawsuits in all 50 states between now and November. And all it would take would be one Trump-appointed ideological judge to rule that the replacement candidate hadn't satisfied the requirements to be on the ballot, and we would not have a Democratic candidate on the ballot in that state. Okay, I just have to point this out. It doesn't really matter at this point. Like, I'm going to say it again. It doesn't really matter at this point whether or not there's a legitimate legal basis for it. What matters is the chaos that is going to ensue. And I'm going to point something else out. A floor fight at the convention is going to do the same thing. Okay, the way that you build up confidence in your party to lead in the future is not to have a floor fight at the convention over who should be the nominee for president, let alone with an incredibly successful incumbent. This is like, it's just, I have these moments where I wonder how it is that people who have really not thought this through have taken the huge platforms that they have built as progressives and Democrats and the huge, largely positive reputations they've built in that regard and are out there literally spouting nonsense, like nonsense that at this point could cost us the election if what they're recommending is followed through on. Like, it's as dumb as it gets. And I have to point out as well, New York Times, we've talked about the New York Times going down the toilet so many times on this broadcast. The New York Times greenlit that ridiculous op-ed from George Clooney. They are amplifying on a regular basis people who are calling for Biden to quit. Okay. And it is, in addition to the fact that it is like ageist and ableist and, not based in any kind of diagnosis, like, the president's health records are public. It's also something that if you don't understand the way conventions work and you don't understand the legal system and you don't understand the way in which the law has been weaponized by Trump and his attorneys, you're literally creating a fiasco. You're creating a fiasco between now and November. Like, sorry, but I'm like really wound up about this. And at this point, I'm just done with it. Like, I'm so completely done with it. This is a moment where we have an obligation to change the way that we talk about this. This is a moment where we have to recognize, just like my thumbnail said this morning, that the choice is between democracy and fascism. Okay. It's not a choice between Biden and Trump. The choice is whether or not we're ever going to have an election again. The choice is whether or not every brown person is going to be stuck in a concentration camp, or whether like those folks or you yourself are going to be able to walk around this country. The choice is whether or not like commentators like me and like people with $1 million podcasts who are currently calling for Biden to step down are going to end up like incarcerated. It's whether or not like anybody who can ever get pregnant is going to ever have access to reproductive health care again. It's whether or not people on Social Security and Medicare are ever going to have access to benefits, right? It's whether or not like anybody who needs SNAP is ever going to be able to access food. Like, that's what we're up against. Like, people need to get really, really freaking clear at this point. Okay, this is not a moment that we should be messing around with. And to be honest, the idea that we're going to find some magical replacement candidate, as Jasmine Crockett put it, like, President Fantasy Football, or however she termed it, like President Fantasy League, like, this is not the moment. This is not the moment to mess around with this. It's just not. And, I've said it before. I think at this point, we have to spin the way this is being discussed to focus on Project 2025 and the fascist movement in the United States and Trump's ascension to power, not just because he himself is a malignant narcissist, not just because he idolizes Hitler and Hannibal Lecter, not just because he can't string a legitimate sentence together any longer, but because of everyone who surrounds him and what they are planning, which is essentially the end of America. Like, and that's not an overstatement. If you have been exposed to anything related to Project 2025, you understand what is at stake here. Like, you understand what is at stake. And the answer to this is actually in some ways quite simple. It is to drown out the punditry where you live. It is to have conversations with people that you know and love or don't love or just come across in your daily life about Project 2025 and what's at stake. Because again, I've said this for the last 3 broadcasts. I'm going to say it again now. The data is showing that when people learn about Project 2025, Biden's votability, like essentially the number of people who are going to vote for him, goes up by 14%, double digits. It is a 14% increase in people who are going to support Joe Biden or get out to vote. So at this point, we have to be really real about it. I'm sorry, I got to call somebody out here. Project 2025 does not just depend on a lot of congressional bills. Some of it does. Some of it does. And yes, it is very important. I mean, I said this yesterday. Democrats up and down the ballot. We cannot just be focused on the presidential. We cannot just be focused on Biden versus Trump. Like, that's not the answer. We have to be focused on every election, down to like the most local election where you live. Okay. But I'm going to say something else. If you think that Trump isn't going to weaponize executive power the second that he is returned to office, you got another thing coming. Okay. They're not going to wait for Congress to do anything on this stuff. They're not. They're going to use it all through the mechanisms of agency power, which, by the way, have essentially been completely eliminated by the Supreme Court. Okay. And they're going to appoint people who are going to carry out Project 2025 through executive agencies under the control of the executive branch of government. Okay. It is not just about what the Congress is going to be able to do. Okay. It is also about what Trump intends to do the second that he returns to that office, which, again, God damn it, we got to fight like hell to make sure that never happens. All right. So what I want to just say to everyone is this: like, you have to get brave and you have to change the narrative. And if you, like me, are completely out of F's this morning, because I really am, I'm just done with all this nonsense. You've also got to make your voice heard by calling your senators and your representatives and telling them how you feel. Tell them to get the party in line. Tell them to stop this nonsense. Tell them that they are sabotaging the future of American democracy. Get loud. It's okay to be angry. Like, tell the people who you have elected to vote for you that, to govern for you, what you think. Bye. I've already packed my troll bell, so somebody give me a ding. All right. I want folks to understand that, as with everything else, the responsibility for this lies with us. And, you can also write letters to the editor. You can make your voice heard to the various podcast hosts who I'm not going to name, who are doing this nonsense relentlessly right now. You can be heard. Okay. You can be heard. And I want to encourage you to do that. Like, not just in the context of like external media folks who matter less, but in the context of your everyday life. Okay. And I'll just say, there's another person on our Patreon feed this morning who shared a very difficult conversation that she and her wife had with some family members about Project 2025. And these are people who are Trump voters, and about the way in which Project 2025 would impact her life and her wife's life and their life together, among other things. And it caused a moment of real cognitive dissonance in her family, where there was an awareness suddenly, at least from how it was reported, that the family members had kind of a breaking point of like, wait a minute, we're being lied to. And what do we do with this, right? They're not flipped all the way to Biden yet, right? They're not flipped all the way to voting Democrat up and down the ticket yet. But the awareness of Project 2025 is changing the way people view this election as a whole. And so from that place, we need to keep having difficult conversations. And these conversations are painful. Like, the person who was talking about this on our Patreon feed talked about it as like a very deep and difficult therapy session that she herself was conducting with her own family. So I want to remind people that it takes, and I'll shout this person out again, I'm not going to do it by name, but it takes an enormous amount of courage and bravery to have a conversation like that. And that is what is required of all of us right now. Like, seriously, because the media is having a field day. And we need to be counterbalancing that by having the most difficult conversations that we need to have with people we know are not aware. Okay. And you all know how I feel about trying to convert people in the cult. But on the other hand, if you have an opportunity to do something like this in your own family, you should absolutely take it. Absolutely take it. Okay. So fundamentally, what I want to just say today is this: we have to fight for our democracy. And it's time for us to stop being in this place of like fear and panic and, oh my God, the media is off the rails, right? It's time to actually start fighting, because we can win this thing. Like, I have literally no doubt about this. Like, I'm going to remind you, white male pundits are a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of American society. right? A tiny fraction of people are calling for Joe Biden to step aside. And I don't want to hear from people on this feed who are like, oh, I saw what happened to the debate. There's a legitimate concern. You know what? If you're sick, if you've traveled nonstop, if you haven't gotten enough rest, if you're busy running like the biggest democracy in the country, then you can talk to me about whether or not Joe Biden just had a bad night or like there's something legitimately wrong. If you were not a neurologist who has actually legitimately examined him, I don't want to hear this nonsense anymore, because all you're doing is creating problems. Like all you're doing is suppressing the vote. All you're doing is adding to the cacophony that is making people who are disengaged and disaffected be like, I'm out. You want to win? Like, it's time to move on and to start actually fighting for democracy. I don't care if you fight for Joe Biden. I mean, like you should, but what I care about is whether or not you're going to fight for democracy. And Joe Biden is the incumbent. He is the nominee. Vice President Harris is his vice president. You're voting for her whether you vote for him or not. I mean, like at this point, like, well, that's not true. You're voting for her when you vote for him. That's what I meant to say. And so, to be honest, at this point, it's a moment to just legitimately start getting angry if you're not angry already, and fight for their future. Like, fight for kids like mine. Fight for them to have a country to live in, right? Fight for the people you care about who are marginalized. Fight for yourself. Like, enough of the nonsense. Like, enough of the drivel and the pandering to other white men who are nervous. Like I said this morning, I've been freaking nervous since 2015. It hasn't stopped me from like going all in. Like, cut it out. Okay. Like, literally people are going to die if we don't get this together. Like, and people are dying every day, but like seriously, like people in America are going to die en masse if Trump is elected because of this garbage of like Democratic white male pundits eating their own. Like, enough, like enough. It's time to fight. It's time to fight. Okay. Fight for the future. Get out there and talk to people. Change the narrative. Stop listening to the nonsense. It's garbage. Just trash, right? Just garbage. Okay. A couple other things I want to mention. Today was supposed to be the sentencing of Donald Trump. In case you're marking dates, right? We all know the sentencing has been bumped to the 18th of September. I just have to remind everybody, because this has also completely fallen out of the media cycle. The Republican nominee has been convicted of 34 felonies related to election interference. He's like pending sentencing for like what could be dozens of years in prison. So, also reminder, that's something you can talk about. You can talk about that. That like, the argument that Biden is old is up against a guy over here who's a 34 times convicted felon, adjudicated rapist, convicted fraudster, has had all of his businesses taken out from under his control and put into receivership, who's facing down like 84 total felonies, if you include the ones he's already been found guilty of in 3 other jurisdictions. Come on. We have to start talking about that again also. Okay. I want to talk for a second about the January 6th trial, because I was asked about this. Just so everybody understands this, after the Supreme Court's ruling on immunity, the case has to make its way back down through the lower courts. It has to get transferred down to the Circuit Court of Appeals for DC and then back down to the DC District Court. That will happen sometime before August 1st. Okay. And then we're going to be off to the races in Judge Chutkan's courtroom with a potential evidentiary hearing. Now, we already know that Trump's people are ramping up for further delay. At this point, who cares? Okay. The thing that I want is for there to be an additional discussion in the media about Donald Trump's criminality. Okay. That case is going to start again. We are going to have another moment to be talking about Donald Trump, the convicted criminal, and the criminal facing down additional indictments. That moment is coming, and it's not too far off now. All right. So please, at this point, let's remember that there are other narratives that we can be sharing other than like the one that we've talked about since the top of this broadcast. Okay. I want to talk for a second about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because in case you missed it, she introduced articles of impeachment yesterday against Justice Alito and Justice Thomas. I have to say that I am thrilled with this, and her speech on the floor of the House was one for the ages. You should go watch it. It's very significant and really grounded. I mean, I love. It's been great fun watching AOC, kind of grow into her statesmanship since her initial election. Really encourage everyone to go watch it. I want to warn everybody, however, that because the House is currently under control of the Republicans, the likelihood of this actually leading anywhere is slim. Okay. Comer is still in charge of the Judiciary Committee in the House, which is where articles of impeachment have to start. And I don't think there's any likelihood that this is going to go anywhere between now and November. That doesn't mean the gesture is unimportant. Okay. What AOC is doing is flagging what is possible if we take back the House and keep the Senate. And that at this moment, I think, is a really smart decision politically. So, you can go watch the speech. I would encourage you to do it. It's going to give you a shot in the arm. Definitely worth it. Okay. The New York Times editorial board this morning, in an attempt to kind of salvage some form of its incredibly shredded reputation, has come out with an op-ed by the entire editorial board on Donald Trump being unfit to lead. They did not call for him to step aside. And I read it and I had a moment where I was like, let me not look this gift horse in the mouth. At least they're saying that he's unfit to lead. But given the fact that they had like 12 front page articles about Joe Biden yesterday, I don't want anybody to be under the illusion that anything has changed with the New York Times. All right. Like, yes, it's good they did it. You can go read it. It goes through all the reasons why he's unfit. But I will tell you that at this moment, we need a much louder pivot from mainstream media toward Project 2025 and what's to come in the event that Trump wins, right? We need like an enormous amount of greater mainstream media lens on it than what we have right now. Okay. Final point for today. I know that a lot of you are angry like me, upset like me, outraged like I am about like people in our own party essentially pissing all over our current nominee and our incumbent president. And I will remind you all that in the scale of emotions, rage ranks higher in vibration than despair. Okay. So I want to encourage all of you today to kind of lean into that, because if you're angry about it and you're tired of this whole fiasco, you're tired of this bonfire by the punditry, now is your moment to like not just get involved, which I hope you all are already, but really start, as we've talked about today and yesterday and on Monday, moving forward to actually be a change in your community in the direction of supporting the ticket. And, I'll just say this. You do not have to message it. Like, there's a reason why democracy versus fascism is on the thumbnail today. You don't have to message it as, like, I'm all in for Biden. You can, and you should. I'm going to tell you that I am, right? Like, I'm not any different from that. But if you want to message it, the way to message it is like, it's about democracy versus fascism. It's about democracy versus Project 2025. It's about democracy versus the end of America. And you don't have to terrify people, right? I want to point something out. The two examples that we had today on the Patreon feed that I've already talked about are not examples of people like bludgeoning folks with Project 2025. They're examples of people having nuanced, careful, thoughtful conversations with others about what Project 2025 would mean to their lives. This, by the way, is exactly what the person I mentioned yesterday who's driving rideshare is doing with every person who gets in her car. She's talking to them about their lives and what matters to them. Are they going to vote for Biden? Do they know about Project 2025? Do they know about what it does to, like, let's just say hypothetically, benefits to single mothers? Do they know about what it does to environmental protections if you care about clean water? Do they know about what it does to the context of things like workers' rights? Find the angle in every conversation that you have with the person that you are talking to that will allow this messaging to resonate with them. Okay. And again, I just have to say that, the more that you can try to approach it from a position of empathy, and this is very hard for me right now because I'm like all out of F's, as I've said multiple times today, but the more that you can approach it from a position of empathy that's like, okay, this person is uninformed. Let me help to educate them about what's going on. Let me listen to what their concerns are. Let me save my outrage for over here in, on the broadcast and with my friends, and let me do this work from a position of gentleness, the more likely we are to get there. And I have to remind you all, again, I've said this for the last 9 months at least, the people that we have to target are disaffected and disengaged voters, because that's where it's at. We need to target the people who are thinking about staying home, the people who think their vote doesn't matter, the people who think this whole mess is just terrible and they just don't feel like engaging in it. Democratic Party is fighting amongst itself. I just don't want this like drama. Let me just stay home. Those are the people that we need to get to. Okay. Those are the people that we need to talk to. And I really want people to just continue to find ways to have those conversations where you live, And that includes, by the way, if you live in a blue state. But if you live in a really deep blue place, I'll also just refer you to like Sister District and to other organizations that are working across state lines and across district lines to try to mobilize people in red states along similar grounds. All right. Like there's so much availability of work to do. And last thing that I just want to point out here about this. Okay. If you don't know where to start, go to mobilize.us. Okay. Mobilize.us is a clearinghouse of volunteer opportunities for campaigns and causes where you live. All right. It will automatically route you to events and opportunities in your area to get involved directly. And if you've never phone banked or text banked or canvassed before, you will get trained to do that. It takes some courage. It's a little uncomfortable the first couple of times you do it, but you can do it. And you can get involved in writing postcards and other things. All right. There's so many ways to get involved. So please, 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 please don't neglect the opportunity to convert this moment. Like if you are pissed off, if you are like how I got out of bed this morning, to turn that into action. All right. It's just incredibly, incredibly critical right now. And it's easy. It's not hard. Okay. All right. I promised a note on scheduling. We're here tomorrow, regular time. We're here Monday, regular time. We're here Tuesday, regular time. Wednesday, I'm on a plane back to the East Coast, hopefully barring disaster, with my kids and my dogs for my final move. Okay. My stuff is not going to be there. You guys are going to have to put up with me broadcasting on the floor of the room that is going to be my new office in my new place for like at least a week. The acoustics might be a little wacky, but I will be there. Okay. So next Wednesday is an off day. After that, we should be good to go. Now, there may be a change in regular broadcast time. I have not decided on this yet. You're going to have to give me like a couple of weeks to get settled in, and then we will figure it out. Sometime around August 1st, I'm going to sort this, and we'll see where we land. Many of you know when I lived in New York previously, we had a regular broadcast time of 11 a.m. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to work now. My kids are a lot older, but like we'll figure it out. Okay. So I want to thank everybody who has been so patient and also supportive through this process of me relocating back to the East Coast to be closer to my family and get my kids into a better environment, educationally and otherwise, where they've got a lot of support around them. So please, please, please just be patient with me over the next week. But, you know, regular time between now and Tuesday, Wednesday off, Thursday I will be there, probably regular time, but it'll be noon on the East Coast. Okay, that's that. Lots of love to all of you. I will see you all here tomorrow at regular time. There will be a progressive coffee hour this weekend. Again, you can join that by becoming a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive. And I will be here at regular time Monday and Tuesday, and then we will deal with next week. All right. Much love, everybody. I will catch you all here soon. All right. Bye.